Good evening, everyone. Time for another silver update. Now, this is a chart of the US dollar index overlaid over the US dollar Chinese yuan. So the index is here in the candlesticks and the line chart is the yuan. We know the yuan was flatlined here until about 2006. So a couple of things to point out. First of all, both of them are in a significant downtrend, and I expect that downtrend to continue. Now, we do have a rally that has occurred right here. You can see with the lines drawn in and the arrows that the US dollar index is rallying very strongly, whereas the US dollar is still falling significantly, and I believe will go into new lows against the Chinese currency. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, you need to remember that the US dollar index is a basket. It's a basket of currencies. So it's not a cross. A cross is one currency versus another. The dollar index is the dollar versus a basket of currencies. Now, why do you have a dollar index? Well, I think the reason you have a dollar index is because the dollar is the world's reserve currency. So it doesn't make sense to speak of the dollar in terms of another currency. It makes sense to speak of the dollar in terms of all of the other currencies. But we're not talking about the dollar in terms of all the other currencies. We're talking about the dollar in terms of what I will say the trilateral currencies. Now, conspiracy theorists among us know the Trilateral Commission, organization like the Council on Foreign Relations and all these other big conspiracy Bilderberger organizations. But the Trilateral Commission is an organization of Europe and Britain, United States, and Japan. And so that's the trilateral, that's the three: Japan, United States, Europe, and Britain. And so if you want to try to understand what the dollar index is, that's what it is. It's the dollar versus the Japanese yen, the British pound, and the euro. There are other currencies in that basket, but they don't really mean anything. So what's the point of this? Well, that's what explains the difference here. You can see that the dollar index is in a very strong rally right now, whereas the dollar is falling against the Chinese currency. So which is the real one? Which is the one that really matters? It's my contention that the dollar Chinese yuan and the dollar BRICS, if there were a BRICS index, which there really should be, is the one that matters, not this one. Because as I pointed out before, these other countries and regions are committing economic suicide, trying to prop up at the behest of the Fed or the president or whoever it is, the Pentagon, etc., the CIA. At their behest, they're trying to prop up the US dollar, keep it alive, keep it from collapsing. So that's what's going on. I'm going to try to show you some news stories that bear that out here. So let's take a look at some of these news stories. The first one here is this latest report from the Fed that it's your fault that the economy is poor. Wow, that's incredible. Not the Fed, you. Despite arguments to the contrary from the Obama administration, mounting evidence suggests that the U.S. economy is rapidly falling back into negative growth territory. More Americans are out of the workforce than ever before. Median household incomes are at levels not seen since 1967, and consumer spending is coming to a veritable standstill. The crisis is apparently so significant that a Federal Reserve governor recently said U.S. policymakers are crafting regulations that will force bank depositors to cover any losses should their financial institutions fail. The question that many are asking is, how did this happen? How, after 6 years of recovery efforts and trillions of dollars printed, is it possible that the economy is not booming again? This week, the Federal Reserve published a report that claims to have figured it out, and it turns out the renewed economic downturn has nothing to do with foreign outsourcing, high taxation, increased healthcare costs for businesses, or rising consumer prices for food and energy. No, according to the Fed, it's your fault. Apparently, you are not spending enough money. In order for the economy to recover, you need to stop hoarding cash now and get out there and start buying more homes, cars, vacations, and electronics. Otherwise, you'll only have yourself to blame when the system comes unhinged. Top-tier economists, it seems, are unable to grasp why consumers have decided to hoard, in other words, save their money, even though the central bank is engaged in unprecedented monetary expansion. The answer is simple, really, and you don't need to look at detailed government charts and statistics to figure it out. American consumers have been absolutely pummeled over the last decade. We are losing so many jobs that newly created minimum wage jobs touted by the Obama administration aren't even making a dent. Moreover, the price of food, electricity, gas, and other essentials have risen so sharply that we're paying nearly double for those items than we did a decade ago. And as recently noted by the Economic Collapse blog, over 77 million Americans currently have debt collection accounts, and 25% of Americans have absolutely no emergency cash whatsoever. It's not so much that Americans are hoarding money, a phrase that suggests greedy people all over the country are stacking piles of cash under their mattresses. It's that most Americans don't have any money left to spend. So that's the issue, and we're going to look at the hoarding cash when we get to the Bernie Sanders story. But let's look at the story here about Alibaba. Now, Alibaba is an IPO that's coming out. It's a Chinese IPO. It's a Chinese e-commerce giant. If you want to think about it, understand it, Alibaba is basically the Chinese Amazon. And we know that there are a lot more consumers in China than there are in America, but we've been told that they'll never really amount to anything because they don't make any money. So my question to those people who say that is, why is this Alibaba IPO an IPO worth more than 2 times eBay, almost as large as Amazon? Now, these are the valuations, I believe. Yeah, current market cap value at IPO. Okay, so that was the IPO value of $23 billion. So this is the current market cap, is the large circle, and then the smaller circle is the value at IPO. All right, so you can see that Alibaba is IPOing at $155 billion. Facebook IPO'd at $81 billion, and Google IPO'd at $23 billion. So Alibaba is already twice as large as eBay, almost larger than Amazon, will soon be larger than Facebook, and possibly will be larger than Google. Now, how can that be? Well, the way that that can be is, imagine if you had 1 billion online consumers who had money. Not like Americans who don't have any money anymore, even though the Fed says they do, accusing them of hiding under their mattress. But the fact is that they're broke. But the Chinese are not broke. The Chinese have a lot of money and they're getting more money. There's more proof. Now here's another story of showing you how swiftly this can change. Now, you've heard the analogy of a hole in the dike, putting your finger in the dike, and etc. But we know that when water starts flowing through a dike, it's just a matter of time before the dam gives way, and it's a torrential flood. And this story makes me think we may be on the edge. For the longest time, I've wondered why Argentina was doing what it was doing. And it wasn't a situation where Argentina couldn't pay. Argentina was in a situation where they didn't want to pay the full amount to those hedge funds. And basically what the hedge funds had done is they'd scooped up a bunch of cheap debt because it had been defaulted on in the past, and they got it for pennies on the dollar, and they had a legal right to collect 100% on it, and they forced it through the courts, and they got the decision, and they were right because Argentina had agreed to go by the New York courts. And the reason why Argentina decided to put themselves under the jurisdiction of the New York courts is if they wouldn't have done that because of their terrible previous record of defaulting, then they wouldn't have been able to get any money. So they had to agree to allow the jurisdiction be the U.S. court. So then the decision went against them. But what was interesting to me is that they essentially defaulted on it without a real care. Well, here's the reason. It appears there's another nation on planet Earth that is becoming isolated. One by one, Russia and China appear to be finding allies willing to de-dollarize. And the latest to join this trend is serial defaulter Argentina. As Reuters reports, China and Argentina's central banks have agreed a multi-billion-dollar currency swap operation to bolster Argentina's foreign reserves or pay for Chinese imports with yuan. As Argentina's U.S. dollar reserves dwindle, in addition, Argentina claims China supports the nation's plans in the defaulted bondholder dispute. Having met on the sidelines in Basel, Switzerland in July, Argentine and Chinese central banks agreed to a currency swap equivalent to $11 billion that Cabinet Chief George Kapanovich said used to stabilize reserves. Wonder how long it's going to be until they tell us equivalent to this many yuan as opposed to this many dollars. Argentina, which defaulted on its debt in July, will receive the first tranche of a multi-billion-dollar currency swap operation with China's central bank before the end of this year, the South American country's La Nación newspaper reported. The swap will allow Argentina to bolster its foreign reserves or pay for Chinese imports with yuan currency at a time of weak export revenues, and ailing currency have put the Latin American nation's foreign reserves under intense pressure. La Nación said Argentina would receive yuan worth $1 billion by the end of 2014. The first payment of a loan worth a total of $11 billion signed by Argentina's President Cristina Fernandez and her Chinese counterpart in July. In addition, Bloomberg reports People's Bank of China Governor Zhao Zhuchuan expressed his support for Argentina in its legal fight against holdout bondholders. Isolated indeed, as China and Russia roam the world making friends with every nation that the U.S. is involved with. Now this is a huge story. This explains, and this is the finger in the dike. This is the leak sprouting, and when you think about it, why does Argentina need to do business with the United States? Is it to have U.S. dollars? And what do they need those U.S. dollars for? So you can see that, and then the goods that Argentina has, if those goods are denominated in yuan, and other countries can buy those goods, and Argentina needs yuan to pay China back, you can see that this can have a very rapid snowballing effect. Once the yuan swaps begin to have legitimacy of trades between countries other than that. For example, Argentina needs oil. Well, what if Argentina gets oil from Venezuela and they trade yuan and Venezuela trades with China? So you can see this can rapidly escalate, and the dollar can be dropped by a large number of countries. And what will happen is it will snowball and accelerate. So this is a huge story. So what are we doing about it in the United States? Well, we have socialists like Bernie Sanders saying that we need more taxes. Senator Bernie Sanders, pandering to the Vermont AFL-CIO annual convention on Saturday, used the opportunity to trot out the old socialist vote-getting scam of a wealth tax. As reported by the Washington Times, Sanders, a self-described socialist, called for a progressive estate tax on multimillionaires and billionaires. Calling for a wealth tax, Sanders completely ignores the fact that never in this planet's history have such taxes had the desired effect. Well, in actuality, wealth taxes have often had the effect desired by those calling for such a tax, but that effect is not the effect that proponents claim. So let me correct the last part of the statement in the previous paragraph. Wealth taxes have never increased overall tax revenue, but they have had the effect intended by the person calling for them. That's because the real unstated intent was not to increase tax revenue, as they claim, but rather to get the votes of those too naive to know that wealth taxes just drive wealth to other nations and thus increase the tax load on the poor and middle class who remain. And that's the absolute truth. there's no way that you're going to trap the multimillionaires and billionaires. The only way I can think of trapping them is in a stock market crash. But if you think you're going to tax their money and they're not going to take their money out of the country, you're crazy. That's not going to happen. So these are the people that we have in the United States. Socialists like Bernie Sanders, who are pursuing policies more of the same that are destroying the nation. And yet we have Alibaba IPOing at $155 billion. We have the Federal Reserve blaming American citizens for being broke. And we have Argentina about ready to say goodbye to the US dollar. So these things, in my opinion, they are going to snowball very, very rapidly. It's going to be a time where the dollar could come under severe crisis. Both of these charts could turn down. And I expect that at some point here, very soon, the silver chart's going to turn up. And we'll talk to you next time.